Hi everyone. Welcome, welcome. We're just gonna let a few more people roll in and get connected. As they're doing that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Melissa Lee. I'm the founder and CEO of the Green Program. We have an amazing panel conversation lined up for you all today as a part of the Green Program's International Education Week series. So if this is your first event with us this week or your fourth event with us this week, you're all welcome and we're really happy to see you all here. To get us started, I am really excited to introduce you all to two amazing individuals who are making such a positive impact in the world of not just travel, but sustainability and the intersections between the two of them as well. So today we have Kelley Louise, who's the founder and director of Impact Travel Alliance. And we have Melissa Buerkett, Director of Partnership Development at Global Experiences. So I'll hand it over to Kelley first to introduce yourself, and then Melissa, you can go right after that as well. Thanks for joining us today.
Melissa, thank you so much for having me. It'd be great to hear from the attendees if everyone wanted to put into the chat where you're tuning in from. And also if you're a student, a travel professional, a traveler, just so I have a little bit more context on who's in the group. But my name is Kelley, and as Melissa mentioned, I'm the founder and executive director of Impact Travel Alliance. If you have not yet heard of us, ITA is the world's largest community for socially and eco-conscious travelers, and we have a vision to improve the world through travel. So we do that through education and advocacy around sustainable tourism, and we host events and we create content designed to inform travelers how to explore in a way that has a positive impact on local communities and our environment.
Hi everyone, I'm Melissa Buerkett from Global Experiences. I've been working in international ed for almost 10 years now, and I've been with GE for a very long time. I started off as our London program director on site. And if you're not familiar with Global Experiences, we are an international internship program provider. We also offer virtual internships. We specialize specifically in internships in locations in 15 different cities around the world, and we're really well known for the integration of Clifton Strengths into our career readiness program. And today I'm really excited to talk to you guys about our green initiative, which we launched earlier this year in 2020, and the different prongs of that initiative and how we're rolling that out. So yeah, very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation from the Green Program, and looking forward to the conversation.
Amazing, thank you both. We have tons of questions already prepped for you all. Just for everybody else to know, today our schedule is to start a discussion around how to travel more sustainably, and hopefully getting some good insights and tips on how Kelley and Melissa and their organizations are able to do that, whether individually or as an organization as well. But what I would ask from everybody else watching is to start thinking of questions. We definitely want this to be engaging and here to help you. So, use that chat box, make sure you're connecting with each other as well, and let's maximize the outcomes of this event for sure. Again, my name is Melissa Lee. I'm the founder and CEO of the Green Program. For those of you who are unfamiliar or not familiar with the Green Program, we create short-term programs abroad, all focused on sustainable development. Our mission is to educate and empower future sustainability leaders. And we have also been able to transition our programs into different hybrid models and online models during this time in COVID with the pandemic too. And ultimately bring events like this to you all, which, the whole theme for this week has been how to continue the future of international education in a more sustainable manner. So let's start off the conversation. So Melissa, I can start with you this time, but what does sustainable tourism mean to you, and how is Global Experiences trying to work towards this?
Yeah, to me, traveling sustainably means recognizing that when you go to a new place, that you are creating a connection between yourself and that place and the people who live there, the community, and trying to have as low of an impact during your stay as possible. So first identifying, sort of what the spirit of the place is, the spirit of the people, respecting that as much as possible, maybe understanding their practices as far as environmentalism and sustainability, and just adhering, and becoming a part of what they're doing. I'm an avid hiker, so just to keep it really simple, I always think about, take only photos, leave only footsteps, and that just kind of embodies what I believe sustainable tourism could also mean. But in general, just like supporting local vendors, supporting local businesses, restaurants. I tend to, use Airbnb or other sharing businesses when I'm traveling, rather than renting a car, taking Ubers, et cetera, public transportation as much as possible. Yeah, in a nutshell, that's how I feel about it personally. As far as global experiences, like I mentioned, we launched our green initiative earlier this year. It was, it spawned just from like a casual conversation at lunch between myself and our CEO, Emily Merson, about, what can we do? How can we help students just travel sustainably during our program? And we recognize that, the single biggest impact that an individual can have in a year as far as their carbon footprint is a flight, across the ocean. And so just thinking about how do we offset that, and how could we make that just an integrated part of our program. So that night I was kind of excited. I went home after lunch and I, typed in my flight from New York to London, and calculated the tons that my flight had produced. And then I made a donation to a project to offset my carbon output. So it took like 3 clicks and all of $20. And recognizing how simple that was, we figured, why not just do this for all of our students? So for the Green Initiative at Global Experiences, we're taking a 3-pronged approach. The first being to offset the carbon emissions of all of our student participants' flights. The second is the greening of our on-site programming. So embedding education about sustainable practices while the students are living and interning abroad into our pre-departure orientation or orientation, and also then presenting them with the challenge on how to live more sustainably while they are in that particular city. And then the third prong is conducting a green audit of our own organization, looking at our practices, as an office in terms of our energy consumption, single-use plastics, reducing paper, et cetera. So these are the things that we're doing right now. Some are sort of underway, some are paused because of the pandemic, and others are, further in development. So I'm sure as we continue the conversation this afternoon, I can, get into more detail about the different aspects, but that's it in a nutshell. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, awesome, Melissa. Thanks for sharing that. I already have a few questions, especially with carbon offsetting, and that's a topic that's really interesting to me in the green program and the direction of what that means for the industry too. But before we do that, Kelley, I'll pass it over to you. What does sustainable tourism mean to you?
That is a great question. It's one that I get a lot. And I think that even asking the question and the fact that it comes up so much is really an interesting way to look at our industry, because everyone seems to have a little bit of a different definition of it and a little bit of a different way that they're incorporating it into their business model or their personal practices. So to maybe take a big step back and just define it broadly, the easiest way for me to think about sustainable tourism is just thinking of it as a holistic approach to having a positive impact on people, planet, and profit. So just a triple bottom line approach where you're able to positively impact our world through tourism. And when you shift your mindset to think of it in a broader concept like that, it becomes really powerful, because that definition isn't necessarily a niche within the industry. It's really an umbrella and a travel style that can be applied to any type of travel, no matter your destination, no matter your budget, no matter what type of way you want to experience the world. So I think that that's really important, just to take a step back and think about like, what is the broadest definition for it? Because it is oftentimes very confusing to shift to sift through all of those different definitions, especially when you start to think about, for example, regenerative tourism is a very big buzzword right now, and there's a lot of press that's happening around regenerative travel. There's ecotourism, there's responsible travel, there's ethical travel, and I think that that can all be very overwhelming as, especially as a traveler, when you know that you want to have a positive impact on your world, but you don't quite know the differences between each of those. So I always like to take a step back and really just look at it through the lens of saying, okay, my agenda is to empower locals and to protect the environment. And how can I do that through every single touch point that I have as part of my traveler's journey, whether that's looking at the booking platform that I'm booking my flight on, or considering what I'm packing, because packing lighter means that you're carrying less weight when you're going from destination to destination, so you're able to lower your carbon footprint, or the businesses that you're supporting once you get there. There's all of those tiny little touch points throughout your entire experience as a traveler. And when you start to think about sustainability through a broader lens and also as a journey, then that helps you to incorporate impact into your entire experience as a traveler.
Amazing. Yes, to everything the both of you just said, I think that's it built an amazing platform for us to just continue this conversation. One thing I'd add, just from our experience with the Green Program too, is I think it's overlooked a lot when you're looking at just tourism across the board. But when we're designing programs, and I'm going to different locations around the world to design green programs too, I think it's what has stuck with me is and it's been a learning process too, but how do we create and design programs that have the perspective of the locals in mind? So for example, how do locals or the local community want their country or culture to be perceived, versus how does Melissa, as an American citizen, want to go to Peru, for example, and want to be seeing, right? So there's a slight difference. There could be a drastic difference between the two, but Kelley mentioned having a different lens and applying different lenses when you travel too. And I do think when we're talking about sustainable tourism, the perspective that we're really going into these travel opportunities with could be taken, a little bit. We can go a little bit deeper with that perspective as well. So my next question for the two of you is, what do the next few years of your organizations look like in terms of your next steps for trying to become more sustainable? What's on the horizon? Kelley, I can start with you.
So I know that Melissa will have a very different answer than mine, just in terms of incorporating sustainability into a business model. And I'm certainly interested in hearing her perspective on that. But thinking about it in terms of Impact Travel Alliance and what we're doing, again, our organization is really rooted in educating and empowering travelers to make more impactful decisions. And to give you a little bit of a glimpse of the type of programming that we do, we look at big picture causes, much in the same way that the Green Program does, to look at the Sustainable Development Goals and say that there's these big picture issues like the climate crisis, or social justice, or looking at how we can empower women. And we take all of those different components, and then we create content, whether that's through an event in person when we can, but currently online, as well as through our online resources and articles. And we look at how we can take something like social justice and help to improve that through something as universally appealing as traveler. So our space within the industry, there needs to be action from all different sides of the industry, thinking about consumer education, governments taking action, businesses doing their part. But what we're really focused on is educating travelers, how they can have a positive impact and how they can continue to learn about sustainable tourism and incorporate it, and ultimately speak with your dollars. So we're really very much focused on consumer advocacy through buying power. And that becomes very powerful when you look at brands who have many big brands especially are testing out very innovative models to say, okay, how can we make this product more green or more appealing to this sort of demographic? And they're listening to that data. And there's this gap between, I'll use Skyscanner as an example. Skyscanner has a greener choices label on their flights. So when you search for a flight, booking a eco-friendly flight is very difficult to do as a consumer because every airline is different. They all have different sustainability measures. Some of them are greenwashed, which means they're not often telling the truth about what they're doing. That's an eco-friendly practice. And then on top of all of that, different flights are different. So depending on the plane that you're on and how old that model is or the route that it's taking, it's going to have a different carbon footprint. So that's very difficult as a consumer to sift through. And Skyscanner created an algorithm that just shows a little green leaf in your search results. And so as a traveler, you see that green leaf. And if you're clicking that, you're voting with your dollars and you're telling Skyscanner that you want more eco-friendly options. And that's a way to act as an advocate for sustainable tourism, because when you take a corporation as big as Skyscanner, and the airline industry is such a huge part of the travel industry, that becomes a way for them to say, look, there's something here. There's a business model behind this, and they're able to further invest in it. So our basis is really rooted in trying to bridge that gap between what's happening within the industry. We act as your friend that's really able to translate that jargon and terms like over-tourism or greenwashing, or really find and celebrate those innovative brands so that you, the traveler, can have a positive impact on the world through tourism.
Great, thanks, Kelley. What about you, Melissa? What are your thoughts on that, and you know, what's next for global experiences?
I mean, education is key. You know, the work that Kelley and her organization is doing to help travelers make better choices is a huge part of that process. Yeah, we are all having a tremendous impact with our dollars and what choices we're making. And, you know, internally, from a program development perspective, we're trying to make it as simple and practical as possible for students to implement a different way of being when they're abroad during their internships, and education is a huge part of it. So anytime a student enrolls into the Global Experiences program, they receive login access to a portal, which is specific to their program, and it's where they interface with their advisor and they upload their professional development documents, and they just, you know, get ready for their trip, flight details, you know, housing, contracts, roommate survey, all the nitty gritty. But we are integrating a tab for green education for that particular city on practices that the students can start adopting right when they get off the ground. And the conversation that we were just having about the perspective of the local culture and how they want to be viewed and what's important to them in terms of sustainability and green practices is a part of that. So all of our location staff are permanent residents, and they're a huge part of customizing that education piece in the portal, based specifically on the country that the student is traveling to. It's going to look very different in Milan than it will in Sydney versus San Jose, Costa Rica, Dublin, Ireland. So we want it to be as specific to the location as possible. So that portal piece is a huge part of it. We sort of, you know, repetition is key with education. And so we revisit it again during the pre-departure orientation, and then revisit it again during the on-site orientation. And then in development for 2021, fingers crossed, if students are going to be able to go abroad, we're going to be initiating a green challenge on the ground where students can earn badges for adopting different practices, whether it's related to you know, food consumption, if it's, you know, shopping at the local markets, or choosing you know, a vegan restaurant, going meatless Mondays, whatever, transportation, recycling, water bottles, anything that they can do to just shift their practice in a small way. And hopefully that instills in them sort of just a better way of being even when they return home. But they have to document their activity and then submit it to our location staff for review. And whoever earns the most badges sort of, you know, becomes denoted as the like greenest intern and receives accolades from our staff and so forth. And they can, you know, talk about this experience with future employers or grad school admissions, whatever, if this is something that they feel connected to. But we want to incentivize and make it as simple as possible as far as the student programming. And I think that's important because with the carbon offsetting, we have an ethical decision. It's like, what's the right choice? Do we take the easy approach and do all of the offsets for the students, or do we involve them in the process? We really had a push-pull in that way. It's easier for us to just calculate the carbon emissions ourselves for all the students' flights and then make the donations on their behalf. But without them actually involved in the process of offsetting, they're not learning how to do it for themselves. So we needed something that sort of showed that they had skin in the game and that they were, committed to this green initiative, just as our organization is too. So that's where the Green Challenge and the education piece is coming into play. We offset 338 tons in the springtime, and obviously with the pandemic, students did not travel this summer. So we joke that our virtual interns are the greenest cohort that we've ever had. So in future years, we're obviously continuing with the offsetting, enhancing the education programming. Global Experiences is also a division of AIFS, the American Institute for Foreign Study, which has traditional study abroad, faculty-led programs, semester programs, and as well as, Au Pair in America, Camp in America. So there are a number of different programs, and the goal of Emily Merson, our CEO of Global Experiences, in her new leadership role of AIFS College Division, is expanding the carbon offsetting initiative to all AIFS programs. So this is going to have a tremendous impact because we're talking about tens of thousands of students, not, a small cohort of students doing an international internship. I think that's, and then I mentioned we're having the green audit of our own organization. That's on the agenda for the coming years, but looking at, our own energy consumption in terms of the building that we're in, use of single-use plastics, like I mentioned, our paper consumption, et cetera. So we are going to be partnering with an external organization to conduct that audit in the coming years. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. And okay, we need to talk about this now because we can't talk about sustainable travel without talking about the airlines and the solutions and what's happening there with emissions. So just let's dive a little bit deeper into carbon emissions, because I have a bone to pick with this situation. And I will say, full transparency, Green Program also offsets all of our students' flights since 2015 or 2016. So it's been something that we've been really on board with as an organization, but as an individual, as a leader, as somebody who's an environmentalist, I've just been hearing so much more now about carbon offsetting with different organizations and a lot of different universities. So what I'm kind of going through in my mind with the pros and cons of this, and I'm hoping we can unpack this a little bit because maybe you'll help me too and other people listening. So for a second, I want to challenge us to think outside of our own organizations and just travel the right thing to do across the board. So with carbon offsetting, obviously the pros are that, well, maybe we can talk through pros and cons. So basically the challenge that I'm having with this is that, for example, by 2021, which is in 2 months, not even, the EU is not going to even allow carbon offsetting to count towards carbon emission reduction. Mm-hmm. And a big reason for this is because the amount of it's the logistics, I think, behind all of this, right? The amount of time it takes for a student to offset their flight, get the money to a fund, to go to a sustainable project, to grow trees in the Amazon. The cost there, the emissions have already been done, and and there's so much more that's involved in growing one tree. Yeah. Then there's other things like monocropping, where, sure, we're donating so much money to offset, to grow trees to the Amazon, for example, and the amount of time it takes for that, and the amount of what's actually good for the planet in terms of monocropping the same tree in the same location, in terms of soil erosion, what's happening with the actual land around it too. So when we're looking at the sustainability of it, I'm curious if we can unpack that for a little bit there, outside of our own organizations, just as individuals and leaders in the fields. Is there a concern for carbon offsetting to be an easy, because it is an easy, check, click a box, send a donation to an organization and hope for the best? Or, is it deeper than that? Do we need to be doing more than just saying we're carbon offsetting? Because right now, every conference I attend, that's like the only solution that a lot of people are talking about. So I'm interested in hearing both of your thoughts.
I can speak to that. In our investigation of what platform to use for the calculation, as well as what organizations that we were going to use in terms of selecting the projects, we did a lot of research. And I think that, that delay in the immediate impact of the offset and the purchase of the carbon credits is a real thing. Yeah. And I think not all programs are created equal. So the gold standard is what we use. They're backed by several international NGOs. What we like also is there's a diversity of the different types of sustainable projects that are available. So it's not just planting a tree. Clean water, energy, green energy programs. It's not just take this number, these number of credits, carbon credits, and then purchase a tree. But yeah, I think the issue for us is that it is a quick and easy solution. And I think it's a start, it's not, well, I shouldn't say it's a solution. It's a quick and easy step, but it's not the solution. And we need to challenge students to think about the longer term impact of their travel rather than just the immediate like fuzzy feelings that you feel after you donate your money, or you're like, I'm going to choose this program because they do carbon offsetting. Well, hopefully everybody does it. It can't hurt, right? So if we're going to conferences and everyone's talking about carbon offsetting, I say that's a good thing, because nobody was really doing it, maybe aside from you guys and a few other organizations a few years ago. So if a few organizations are starting to do it and it's challenging others to get on board with that, I say the more the merrier. But what we really need to do, we can't avoid the flight. If someone wants to travel to Europe or they want to travel to Southeast Asia, we can't avoid that. We can only give them choice on, how they can envision the impact of their travel in that way. So yeah, I agree. It's just a step, and hopefully through education and helping students to understand how their actions on the ground have an impact as well, not just the flight, is very much still a part of the conversation, just as much as the carbon offsetting is.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. Kelly, what are your thoughts?
I have 1,000,001.
I'm sure.
To build off a little bit of what Melissa is saying, I first want to just define greenwashing as well as another phenomenon. So greenwashing would essentially be for a brand to say that they're doing something that's an eco-friendly practice, but they're slapping a label on that isn't as authentic as it seems. And there's plenty of companies out there who might not have any commitment to the environment as a whole, but they're like, it's fine, we carbon offset, and so this is good. On the flip side of that, you also have what's called green hushing. And green hushing is when brands are doing impactful things, but they're not talking about them for fear of backlash from consumers, for basically reaching out and saying you're not doing enough. And I think that this is a tricky balance, especially from the traveler's perspective, where one part of you wants to call out the brand that's not doing enough. And then the other part is like also wanting to root for them to do more as well. And so you have to find that balance between saying, yes, this is good that you're doing this, but how can we continue along our sustainability journey? And one way that you can advocate for that as a consumer is even just reaching out and saying, I love that you do this, but I won't book with you until you also do this sort of thing. And that's really a way to inform them that you care about the environment and you care about their practices as a whole. All of that being said, I think it's really important to note that almost everything that we do has an impact on our environment and the climate crisis. So whether that's thinking about, it could be something like taking a flight somewhere, but it could also be thinking about the food that you're eating. And that's not just the type of food that you're eating, it's how far the ingredients have traveled to get to your plate, or how they've been created in the first place. every single person who is here right now, you are on a computer and you're using your screen, and that has an impact on our environment as well. There's a really fantastic book if you want to learn more about some of these topics. It's called Inconspicuous Consumption, and it is by Tatiana Schlossberg. So it's a very fantastic look at all of these different ways that we do have an impact on the environment through our day-to-day actions. And when we take that mindset and we start applying it through a travel lens, whether that's a brand trying to make their organization greener, or us as travelers trying to have less of a carbon footprint through our experiences, it's important to take that into account and then understand that a carbon offset is just a Band-Aid on the problem. So if you're not looking at all of those other little ways that you have an impact on the environment and you're saying we're offsetting carbon, therefore we're green, it's not enough. And so learning more about that, getting really curious about that, is a really great way to be able to start to see the differences between greenwashing and greenhushing, and really advocate for brands who are pushing for a greener industry. And I want to also talk about one point here as well, is that even in thinking of the travel industry, a lot of people are quick to say it's bad for the environment. There's things like flight shaming that are happening that are huge trends where people are like, don't get on a flight, it's bad for the world. But there's also all of these really beautiful things that come from it at the same time. And I'm a firm believer that you don't protect what you don't know. And travel is a way for us to get out and see our world, to experience nature firsthand. And if we can go to a rainforest and see that firsthand, and that allows us to come back home and become an advocate for our rainforest and protecting them. Or if we're able to go and have an underwater experience in the oceans, then that allows us to think about our environmental impact on the oceans around us. So the more that we can think about, again, all of those little touch points that we have as a traveler and as an individual in our world, and how we can minimize our impact, and getting really curious about the world and learning more about it, then that ultimately allows us to explore in a more mindful and conscious way.
Well said. Thank you both for your insight on that. You know, as we head into this new era of travel too, I do think it's such a good chance for reform and for us to hit a reset button and just think about how we can minimize, like what Kelley was saying, because everything we're doing, there's no way, I don't think we can do emission free, at least for traveling at this point. But you know, how do we minimize, how do we be intentional with what we're doing? And I think that's what it comes down to as well. And I'll also echo, you know, for the students who are listening to, it's not just who you're traveling with, but also like advocating for this type of travel, what you want with your study abroad departments, with your faculty. You know, they are eager to hear what students want and need, and are ultimately there to be working with you and for you to help deliver positive and sustainable experiences too. So some of my 2 cents with that as well. Speaking of a new era, it's 2020 as a reminder, not that we all needed that. But Kelley, I'm hoping you can shed some light on, you know, your experience and insight into what the ethics look like for travel during a pandemic right now. And, you know, what are some factors that we should be considering when we travel, or even from showing support from afar?
Good question. So at Impact Travel Alliance, we have been hosting an ongoing event series called Reopening Destinations and the Ethics of Travel During the Pandemic. So I will preface everything that I'm about to say, that I cannot possibly tell you everything that you need to know in a single answer, even a single event. So I encourage you to look Impact Travel Alliance up on YouTube. We have the recordings available there so far. But the main mission of what we've been trying to do with this series is really to inform travelers how they can make more conscious and ethical decisions in this space where 2 things exist. It's on one hand, there's a global pandemic and the travel industry has been brought to a halt. And as a conscious consumer, one thing that we hear a lot from our community of change makers around the world is that if they're thinking about visiting a destination, they're not just thinking about the safety of themselves, but they're also thinking about the safety of the destination that they're visiting. And that sort of added layer to the planning process of figuring out how you can explore in a respectful and impactful way. There's a lot to navigate there. It's not a black or white solution. The mainstream media has really been portraying it as these destinations are open and these destinations aren't. And so you're like, cool, I can go to Mexico, but I can't go to Canada. Does that mean you should go to Mexico? Who knows? Like, there's a lot of things that you have to unpack within that. And ultimately it comes down to a personal decision. And it's also very much a place of privilege where you're coming from if you are able to travel right now. So some of the overarching themes that we've been talking about, again, trying to discuss the nuances behind thinking about taking a trip right now, have been looking at ways that we can balance safety versus the economy. In regions such as the Caribbean, for example, 80 to 90% of their economy is reliant upon the tourism industry. And so when you take travelers and tourists out of the equation, then that's livelihoods and families that are being impacted. We've also talked about travel's connections to conservation efforts. We had an event focused on conservation efforts in Uganda, and there's actually very sadly been a rise in poaching in the region because there's less tourists who are visiting right now. And that's a really valuable case study to look at the intersectionality and the connection between the economy, local livelihoods, and conservation efforts. Because when travelers come in, they're spending money in the region, they're providing local families and local communities with an opportunity to earn revenue through many of these conservation efforts. And when you take the tourists out of the region, then you have a lack of visibility, and you also have a lack of tourism dollars that are coming in. And so for anyone who's an environmental advocate, it's easy to look at conservation as good and poaching as bad. And it's much more of a nuanced conversation than that, because poachers are people. They are trying to fend for their families. And sometimes that's all that they can do. And our speaker for that specific event, he actually shared a story of where there were hunters in the region who had to go out into Windy National Park, and they were just trying to get food for their family, and they accidentally shot a gorilla. And that was an accident and a tragic situation. And it's all of these repercussions that we're seeing. That story is not unique to the region. You see that all over the world in so many different destinations. So there's a lot of decisions, again, into thinking about should you be traveling right now? Is it safe for you as an individual? Is it safe for that destination? Can you do so in a respectful way when you're considering that the place that you're visiting is also someone else's home? So we've been really trying to host events that go deeper into that and really talk about those nuances in different situations, and help, again, create informed decisions so that you can decide if it's right for you. And if you decide to stay home, all of our speakers are locals in these destinations, and we've been asking all of them, how can we support even if we're coming from afar? So that could be anything from planning a future trip. It could be donating to a local nonprofit in the region. It could be purchasing art from local artists, thinking about the holiday season that's coming up. I personally normally get most of my holiday gifts when I'm traveling. And I love being able to go back to my family and tell them the stories behind each of these locally made pieces. A lot of that is available online now. So just thinking about ways that you can still make that connection, even if it's just in a digital format.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It reminds me of a real life example that we're going through right now with the Green program, and we have a program that's one of our newest programs in Nepal, and it's focused on microgrids in rural development. So, in 10 days, these students are going from traveling to Nepal, studying and learning all the theory about solar technology specifically, and then working with our local partners on the ground to actually install the solar systems within these rural communities. And working with our partners there, of course, like every month or so, we're talking about, okay, updates, what's going on, what do we think about the next season, safety, risk. And one of the things that came up was, well, and this was a few months ago, but well, it looks like most of the cases of coronavirus have been mainly within Kathmandu in the city. So there was actually a lower risk to be in the communities where we would do the installations out in the rural villages. But the biggest thing for us, I just couldn't consciously be bringing other students from all corners of the world to a rural village who doesn't have the same access to healthcare as we do. And God forbid we ever put anybody else, like that local community, at risk too. And then just so that on its own was already like really risky for us and out of the question. But then to peel back a few more layers of just the decision-making process there, the response I got from our partners was like, okay, well, that's good, but now someone needs to go into that community and let them know that they still can't get access to electricity and water. Because they're waiting on this installation. So, that's the other side of this. And our hope is, of course, well, hopefully just a few more months of that is the pro versus getting in there and rushing through a project and hoping, that we can just like tie together a few solar panels and put people at risk for that way too. So it's forced us to also think about, how can we actually get, solar panels into these communities without us physically being there, but also still delivering educational content and, staying committed to our mission and delivering international education to students all around the world without putting anybody at risk. So, there's different ways around that. And of course, like these situations are forcing us to think not just strategically and being innovative with different models, but also ethically too. So Kelley, thanks for bringing up all those points. Melissa, did you have anything else to add to that?
Not so much. I really appreciate the stories and hearing the perspectives of the locals that you're working with, Kelley, for your series. And I think the word that was popping into my head when I was just hearing both of you speak just now is just empathy. And I feel like for a lot of times when individuals travel, they're thinking about what are they going to get out of the experience, whether, it's trying new food, seeing beautiful sights, getting these gifts, to share with others when you come home or to put on your wall. But once again, going back to that, intercultural interaction and interacting with the other. And when we understand someone or, a culture that's different than us, it allows us to have more empathy and to live a more peaceful existence. And we still have to have that consideration during this pandemic. How is my travel going to impact the other when I go to that location? I mean, I live in a tourist community, a tourist town, Beacon, New York, about an hour north of New York City, and our numbers are quite low. And we, see a lot of tourists come up from the city, from Connecticut, from New Jersey, from Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, all over on the weekends. And our small little main street is flooded and our hiking trails are flooded. And we understand that people coming from larger metropolitan cities want to get out. But it is frustrating for our local community to be sort of bombarded. And so on a personal note, being in a place where there is a large degree of tourism, it is unnerving. And so just taking that into consideration when you're thinking about whether you're going to travel or not. The CDC just advised against Thanksgiving travel. I just saw that post on the Washington Post. So that has to come into consideration. In terms of global experiences, we're trying to be as creative as possible with our program models and incorporate a virtual option where it might be necessary. If students want to travel to a destination that's open and quote unquote open and still accepting Americans, even though our rates are so high, we have to be prepared and prepare the students for the potential of switching to a virtual internship. And so I think having empathy, setting expectations are so important right now, and just following guidelines that are set for us by the health officials.
Amazing.